Hello and welcome to the Astranti pre-scene analysis for the CIMA Operational Case Study 2018 May exam. In this video, the first in the pre-scene analysis video series, we'll be looking at the Mansako pre-scene given by CIMA and going through and analysing that. So my name is James and I'll be guiding you through this operational case study pre-scene analysis. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself before we get into it. So I'm the head of case studies at Astranti. I oversee the OCS, MCS and SCS at Astranti, but primarily I am the person that produces the OCS pre-scene analysis, the top 10 issues and the strategic analysis. And I'm also involved in writing the mocks and marking the OCS mocks as well. So I'm very much involved in the operational case study, and I have been for several years now. I know it quite well. I know what the exam contains, what to expect, how to prepare for the exam, and the kind of things that CIMA deliberately put in the pre-scene to set themselves up for exam questions later on. So in addition to being a mock writer and a marker, generally I'm a tutor at Astranti as well. I record and produce tuition videos. I help to write mock exams, not only for case study materials, but also for individual papers such as F1, F2, F3. I've also been part of the production of our study texts, free study texts available at astranti.com. I am on Facebook. If you search for James Nutting Astranti, you'll find my page where I'll be posting plenty of things to do with the operational case study as we lead up to the exams. So this video series has a few different elements. So primarily in this first section, we'll be looking at the pre-scene, and we'll be looking at the pre-scene essentially section by section, page by page, looking at it and analysing it. And what we're going to be looking for are the key points. What can we draw out of the pre-scene that are key issues? And to do this, we'll be using some models such as a SWOT analysis and PESTLE to help us identify key areas of concern for the company, things to keep in mind going into the exam. We're also going to be taking a look at the wider industry in which the company is a part of and how that relates to the company, how that informs what they're doing, their position within that industry, obviously limits or sort of predetermines the options available to them within that industry. Relevant business models that come up, so I've already mentioned SWOT and PESTLE. They're going to be useful in doing general analysis of the company, but there might be other models that we might bring in that actually are more relevant to specific exam questions. And that brings us on to the likely exam issues. So as I'm going through the pre-scene analysis, any issues that I see that I know come up regularly, they've come up in the past, or that they don't come up at all, I'll be taking note of that and sort of preparing you for the exam by telling you what is likely to come up, what is likely to not come up. In addition to that, I'll just be giving you some general hints and tips on exam strategy, how to approach the exam and managing your time and the kind of things to do in questions and planning and the best way to get good answers that ultimately lead you to passing your exam, hopefully the first time round. Once we've done the pre-scene analysis, and the pre-scene analysis, that is the first 6 videos where we're strictly looking at the pre-scene in depth. You have those 6 videos, and then the next video is the strategic analysis. That's a separate video where we take the rational planning model, which is not actually examinable at operational level, but don't worry about that. It's just a tool we are using to analyze the company and essentially come up with a strategy so that when you go into the exam, you can present ideas and discuss issues that are in alignment with the overall strategy of the company and not things that are completely off track in a strategic sense. We also have the top 10 issues video, and that is pretty much what it sounds like. It is the top 10 issues that I've identified in the exam that are likely to come up, and that'll be 10 key areas, and we'll break those down into depth and give you advice on how to prepare for that particular area, what models are relevant, why it might come up, how often it comes up, those kind of things. So that gives you an overview there of the entire video series available for this sitting. How is it going to work? What should you expect from the video series? Well, as we've said, I'll be going through the pre-scene section by section. And as I go through, I'm not going to assume any prior knowledge as I progress. As I go through this, I'm learning things for the first time, just as you are. I haven't skimmed through the whole thing. I haven't looked ahead. So I'm discussing things. We're kind of bringing you through this together, and I'll be hopefully imparting some of my knowledge to you. But as we go through, it would be good if you are reading this section yourself and making notes. So for example, as we continue with this first video, if you would like to say, read the first 2 or 3 pages, make your own notes, and then come back and watch this video and see what I have to add, what kind of analysis I did that you missed out. And perhaps you might have even got things that I missed too. And if you do that, then feel free to comment or get in touch and get involved on our forums. And as I said, you do your notes, make your section of the section, come back to the video and you compare it and see what we go over in my review. And at the end, as I've said, the separate video of the strategic analysis, that's a full strategic analysis. That video itself is usually at least an hour long, and the same again for the top 10 issues. Notes on the pre-scene. So the aim of the pre-scene, and this is an important thing to keep in mind as we go through, think of the pre-scene. Obviously, CIMA have made the pre-scene, and CIMA are the ones writing the exam, and they have their own kind of agenda and the syllabus that they have to test you on. So the pre-scene for them is their opportunity to give you the context for the business so that they can later take that context and give you issues and scenarios. So from your perspective, you can think of it, if you read between the lines and think, okay, CIMA have included this information. Why have they included that? They wouldn't have included it if they didn't need to. So if you think of that as we go through, that will help you when it comes to the exam itself. It's not a good idea to pre-write anything based solely on the pre-scene. So this analysis will be good to give you context. You'll have really good, deep understanding of the company and the industry by the time you're done with this. But the goal or the point of the exam is to deal with issues as they are presented to you. So you shouldn't go into the exam thinking, well, I've basically written out all my answers already. I did the SWOT and I did the pestle. So if anything like that comes up, no, wrong. Don't do that. You can use those models, for example, to give you the context and to be prepared. But if something comes up in the unseen, then, this is to give you the background to deal with unseen issues, not to write your answer before you go in there. So make sure you don't make that mistake. That is not to say that you shouldn't use this on the day of the exam. So this analysis is going to be essential in you getting good marks in your exam. Like I said, it gives you the context, it gives you the background, and you should use it on your exam. But you shouldn't only use that, and you shouldn't think all the work has been done now. You do still have stuff to do on the exam day. And particularly with the strategic analysis, you can make recommendations in the exam that are consistent with our analysis. So going through the pre-scene, the themes that we see come up, the issues that we see come up, the main key points that come up, you can make recommendations that are consistent with that, and that will look good. That will get you good marks. It will show the examiner that you know what you're talking about and you've taken the time to learn about the company. Okay, and with that, let's get back to the pre-scene analysis. Okay, so just a quick note on the structure of this video series. Video 1, this video, will be looking at pages 1 through 4 of the pre-scene. So that's just the first couple of pages, but there's a lot to get into in those first few pages, and as you'll see, there's plenty for us to discuss. And the video series will follow along these lines here, but I'll outline that at the beginning of each video where it's relevant. So this video will be starting with page 2 of the pre-scene. Okay, so on this first page, we're given the job description, and since there's not much here, we'll take this one line by line and really get a good understanding of what it is you'll be expected to do for the company in this exam. So you are a finance officer at Mansako. Okay, and what that means is you're in the accounting department at this company, but you're at the bottom level essentially. So you'll have perhaps other finance officers who are your acquaintances, your contemporaries, and above you there might be a finance manager, and above that will probably be a finance director who ultimately reports to the managing director or CEO. And that'll look something like this. So it's important for you to know the chain of command so you know who it is you're directly reporting to, but also what your kind of overall department looks like. So you might be getting tasks assigned to you from your finance manager, or it might come from the finance director. But obviously, since you're at operational level, you'll be dealing with the sort of more day-to-day tasks. So it's more likely to come from your finance manager. So your main role, as it says in the next sentence, is to support Gwen Giovanni. Okay, so this is your finance manager who will be your direct superior. So it's worth taking note of that name. It might be that you need to use it. It will be good for you. This is your main role, is to support Gwen. Then it's worthwhile you learning that name and thinking of her as a first point of contact for any issues within the exam. You might get questions from anyone in the company, but it's more likely they'll be coming through Gwen. And your main role is to support Gwen Giovanni, the finance manager, and be involved with the production of the annual budget. Okay, so budgets, obviously, they are a key P1 topic. And P1 topics, when you look at the structure of the operational case study exam, P1 topics make up 50% of the marks available. So there's no chance really of you passing the OCS if you don't know your P1 topics. And since you're producing the annual budget, there's a pretty good chance that there'll be a question or an issue in some way related to budgets. But of course, budgets aren't a topic in and of themselves. Budgets also relate to things like costing, and costing relates to variance. So there, straight away, we've got this link into P1 topics, and the kind of core P1 topics that come up again and again are budgets, are costing, and are variances. Okay, let's continue on then. So you are producing, or you're involved in the production of the annual budget. You're also involved in the production of monthly management accounts, providing information to management as required. So you're involved in the production of management information. That's no big surprise. You're training to become a CIMA accountant. Obviously, it's in the name of management accountant. So that's obviously a big part of your role. And that kind of means it could be on anything. But again, that's leaning towards more P1 topics. Always remember in the exam, P1 topics are 50%, so it's worth you getting to grips with those more than any other topic, but not at the cost of learning all the other topics. Continuing on then, so you'll also assist with the preparation of the annual financial statements and deal with any queries regarding financial reporting. Okay, so this is where we start to bring in the F1. So F1 topics in your financial reporting and taxation, they make up about 25% of the operational case study syllabus. So about a quarter of the marks available will be in F1 topics. And usually in the exam, in the OCS exam, CIMA like to ask you about a specific standard, and you'll have to interpret the standard and say how that would instantiates itself in the company, so how that should be interpreted and dealt with. And remember, of course, the F1 is also tax, so if anything comes up, there's likely to be something on tax. And there's several different topics of tax too. It's not just VAT or corporation tax. Things like capital gains or capital gains allowance or revenue grants, those kind of things that relate to taxation, those are quite common topics too. So CIMA like to just pick, sometimes they'll just pick a random accounting standard and they'll examine you on that. So you need to know your stuff with regards to F1. Although it only makes up 25% of the syllabus, that's still a quarter, and if you're missing out on that, you'll fail the exam. So it's another thing to watch out for. Okay, so the perceptive amongst you will have noticed that there's no specific mention of E1 or E1 topics, but that doesn't mean it won't come up, and certainly E1 still makes up an important part of the exam. So similar to F1, E1 makes up about a quarter or 25%. And in actuality, more often than not, E1 is actually only 22% because, of course, in the operational case study exam, there are something available called integration marks. And integration marks are marks given for the kind of cohesiveness and the general integration of your answer, pulling together ideas and as a cohesive whole. And so you usually get 3 integration marks at operational case study level, and that you always get 25 marks for F1 questions, and so generally E1 tends to be, of the 3 topics, the smallest amount overall. What kind of topics do you get from E1? Well, one important one is ethics, and that may be in the form of a specific ethical issue that you are given, but generally it means just having an ethical approach and thinking about ethics with any kind of issue, thinking about stakeholder management and those kinds of things. And generally, again, any E1 topic could come up, but the most prominent or the most popular ones are things like supplier management, and particularly a company like this, where suppliers are going to be important. That could be a topic that comes up. Okay, so what we've done then on this first page here is we've had a look at what it is exactly you'll be expected to do in the exam itself. So your position within the company, you're on the sort of lowest rung in the accounting department, but any of the topics that could come up from the various syllabuses, you could be tested on, but based on the percentage of the P1 being 50%, F1 25%, etc., and the kind of topics that come up again and again, we're starting to narrow down the kind of things that might come up and getting a clearer idea of what kind of things would come up in the exam and what we can prepare for. Okay, so let's continue on to the next page. Okay, so here we start to get into more of the detail about the company, who they are, what their industry it is that they're in, how long they've been around, these kind of things. And this is good sort of introductory information, and we'll be able to get a lot from this, just from these 3 paragraphs here. You'll be surprised at how much you can get just from analyzing this in depth. So let's start at the top then. So founded in 1971 then in Lowerland, in Western Europe, Mansako is a vertically integrated luxury leather goods brand. Wow, okay, so just the first sentence is a lot of data there that is relevant for us to understanding what this company is and what they do. Okay, so first off, minor point but still important, the company was founded in 1971. Okay, and it's, like I say, it's not a super important fact, but it's certainly relevant because we're looking at a luxury leather goods brand, and we need to ask ourselves, okay, it's 47 years. Is that a long time for a company like this? Are they well established, or is that relatively new? And that's something we'll think about as we go through. But generally speaking, leather and the production and manufacturing of leather into goods, that's been going on for a long, long time. So 50 years isn't that long to be around. They're certainly competing with companies that have been around for much longer. But then again, at the same time, there are much newer companies probably coming into the market, into the industry much later on. So it's kind of a middle ground in terms of how old the company is and how long they've been established. So founded in 1971 in Lowerland in Western Europe. Now, obviously, there is no such country as Lowerland, but there is such a thing as Western Europe. So this is a fictional country in which this fictional company is based. And the fact that they've included Western Europe, the fact that CIMA have said Western Europe, is important because it gives you some idea of the kind of culture and the economy and the history of the country in which this company is based. And generally speaking, as is the case with most of these operational case study exams, the company is generally modeled on the United Kingdom. That's where CIMA is based. That's where it's that's where the CIMA qualification was established. And so generally we're looking at companies that are modeled on the United Kingdom, or if not exactly that, a very similar country like Belgium, Denmark, or the other Scandinavian countries, or the Netherlands. Okay, so that means we can expect similar laws on things like business law or taxation, those kind of things, or the free association. It's a kind of capitalist country with minimal or moderate regulation from the government, those kind of things. So Mansako is a vertically integrated. So let's just stop there. Vertically integrated. Again, that's key information that we're going to need in understanding how Mansako work. So what does vertically integrated mean? You should know this. This is part of your E1. Vertically integrated. Pause the video, write down what it is, and we'll come back and we'll discuss it. Did you pause the video? No, you probably didn't, did you? Well, so vertical integration then is when the company controls the entire supply chain. And what does that mean? Well, think of a company like Starbucks. Now, they sell coffee to customers. So their part on the supply chain is they buy in the coffee beans, they make the coffee, and they sell it on. But that's just one step in the process. They've got to buy the coffee beans, which means someone in the world somewhere is collecting or buying coffee beans and perhaps roasting them and selling them to Starbucks. And the person who's buying coffee beans and roasting them has to buy them from someone, perhaps a farmer. So the farmer is involved in the supply chain, and maybe the farmer has, gets the seeds from someone else. So there's this whole process that ends with you getting a cup of coffee, but there's loads of other steps in it. And so what vertically integrated means is that one company, Mansako, controls that entire supply chain with their particular business, which is leather goods. In the Starbucks case, it would mean Starbucks own farms, they plant their own coffee beans, they grow them, they roast them, etc. You get the idea. So in this case, Mansako, they do everything. So they'll be doing there'll be sort of supply management. They'll have to deal with suppliers getting their leather. There'll be the storage of the raw supplies. There'll be the production and the operations, so turning the raw materials into finished goods. There'll be the logistics of sending that out to stores and retailers. There'll be the marketing aspect of it. So the company will need to have marketing to sell, to advertise their products. And then there'll be the actual sales, so the retail and outlets and selling. And then even after that, you'll have the post-sale customer service and all that kind of stuff. So they're doing the whole shebang. So what does this mean for the company? Well, it means they've got a lot of responsibility and a lot that they're doing. Obviously, there's benefits to being integrated. Having that much control helps you ensure the quality is good, and you can be efficient in your manufacturing, those kind of things. If, for example, they were just manufacturing, so they didn't deal with the marketing side or logistics or the retail side of things, then they could just focus on manufacturing. But the side that means there's more responsibilities for them. The company needs to be overseeing more areas to succeed. Okay, so they are about 50 years old. They exist in a fictional country in the real Western Europe, most likely modeled on the UK, and they are vertically integrated. What do? They sell or manufacture and sell luxury leather goods, or they are a luxury leather goods brand. So let's start with luxury. What does luxury mean to you? Well, usually the term luxury implies high price. So in the retail world, at least, if you're a luxury manufacturer, you're going to be selling your goods at above the average. And there's different levels. You could have very, very high end, which is ridiculously expensive, or you could have mid range luxury, and then you go down to sort of average and then budget. So luxury is implying that their goods are going to be highly priced. It also implies high quality. So luxury means it's good and the customers are paying a high price because the thing that they've got is high quality. It doesn't necessarily, though, mean just high quality. Luxury can sometimes be as much about the brand and, you know, the status that comes with owning certain things. So, for example, you might include, you know, a vintage Jaguar E-Type car as a luxury car, which certainly comes at a high price. But in terms of quality, I mean, yeah, it's made from quality, but it's also notorious for breaking down and being very hard to maintain. So there's this idea of luxury. It can be high quality, but it could also be to do with other things as well. I suppose we'll find out more about that as we go on through. So we've got a luxury leather goods brand. So they're dealing in leather goods. So things like handbags, wallets, belts, shoes, any of those kind of things. So immediately what comes to your mind when you think of leather, and this will probably depend on your ethical viewpoints, but when I see leather goods brand, the first thing that comes up in my mind are issues about sustainability. You've got groups, public groups, pressure groups increasingly becoming more and more popular these days, sort of dealing with animal rights, veganism, those kind of things. And they are very much anti-leather. And although it's still a very small part of the general population, they're still sort of fringe groups, it is getting more popular. And something like leather is you know, the question remains in 50 years, in 100 years, how popular is something like leather really going to be, with this kind of bubbling ethical concern about the animal abuse sort of bubbling away under the surface. Okay, so however, that said, I mean, leather is still massively popular. You go in, you know, there's shops and stores all over the world that are selling leather goods, whether it be, like I say, wallets or belts or watches or handbags or jackets or anything like that. So maybe in a long time, leather will be less popular, but at the moment it's certainly doing all right for itself. Okay, so that's just the first sentence of this page, and we've already covered quite a bit there. Let's continue on with this analysis. So the company's shares are listed on Lowerland's International Stock Exchange. So that's key information right there. It's not always the case in the operational case study that the company are a listed company. In fact, the last few that I've been involved in, the company hasn't been public company, it's been a private company. So this is certainly interesting that in the first sort of few lines, we're being told the company is listed and they have shares on an international stock exchange. So what does that conjure up for you? Well, those of you who remember or are familiar with the F1 paper, there's a lot to do with financial reporting there. You know, if they're listed on an international stock exchange, then international financial reporting standards apply, all those kind of things. There's likely the fact that they're listed means they're a big company, they're successful, and the main thing that brings up, of course, is the fact that there are now shareholders, in the sense that, you know, shareholders who are buying stocks on the stock market. You get that classic situation where you've got shareholders who are not involved in the management of the company. You have the directors and the board of directors who are managing it. And you get that classic agency problem, and there's an issue of managing your different stakeholders, and obviously shareholders are one of the most important ones. So there's that whole thing there just from this sentence. You've got stakeholder mapping and management, making sure they're happy. The agency problem, I didn't mention, but corporate governance, that's going to be an issue. So there's lots of things that being listed, lots of issues that are brought up on that. And not only that, but things like monitoring the share price, how certain issues are impacting share price, all those kind of things, how to value the shares. Lots of things that come up from a listed company. Okay, so the local currency is the L dollar, and the company designs, it manufactures, it markets, and it sells their luxury leather products for women. Okay, so before we go on to that and the customers, this is what we were saying about vertical integration. I sort of listed all these things up here. So the company is a designer, the company is a manufacturer, the company is in marketing, and they're also in retail and selling. So there's 4 key areas there that they have to be efficient in and good at to be a successful business. And one wonders whether that was something that happened over time, whether they started simply as a designer or just as a manufacturer, or whether that was a plan from the very beginning. Okay. Manufacturers, markets and sells their luxury leather products. We've already discussed luxury leather products for women. Okay, so we've got here our target market. Or perhaps more appropriately, we would call that the end consumer, given that luxury leather products, women are obviously buying them for themselves, but also they'll be gifted to them from men too. So husbands or boyfriends or fathers or whatever, they'll be buying luxury purses and handbags or whatever it is for women. And so that's kind of their game. And that does bring up the question, why specifically women, why only women's products? Leather products don't have to be women. I mean, there's a whole range of things that are just for men. And is this an integral part of their brand and their image? Is that they are, they do handbags really well. And if they were to say go off and start doing wallets or watches or shoes, they would really struggle to enter that market. Those questions to keep in mind as we go through. And then finally, they sell their luxury leather products for women under the Mansako, or the Mansako. I'm probably going to say this name wrong quite a lot going through this video, because to me it looks like it should have an N in it before the K, and my brain is just telling me to say that, but it's Mansako. Obviously, Mansako. Let me try to make sure I say that right for the rest of the video series. Brand names. That's what I wanted to highlight here. The brand name. The brand there is obviously brand name. It's a kind of an image. It's a thing a company has, a logo or an emblem that people are attracted to, and it's usually on the product themselves, and that is in and of itself is valuable to have a brand. And as we know from F1, again, those of us who recall it, a brand is an intangible asset. Okay, so remember when I said earlier that CIMA obviously are writing the pre-scene, and they're writing it with things specifically punched into it, deliberately written into it, that they can examine you on later? Well, I think this might be one of those things, the fact that this company has a brand. Obviously, that's an intangible asset. Valuing intangible assets, that has its own specific international reporting standard. They like to examine you on reporting standards. And so there's a good chance that you're going to get something on intangible assets. Just saying. Rightio, so let's continue on to the next paragraph and see how long we can spend on that getting relevant information. So in 2007, so about 10 or 11 years ago, the company expanded its operations overseas. Okay, so again, before we even go on, they've expanded overseas. What does that bring up? Well, they're trading internationally. They're a global company. So they've obviously expanded fairly rapidly, or well, not necessarily rapidly, but it took them, nearly 45 years to get to that stage. 35 years, sorry. But they expanded their operations overseas, and now they operate internationally. So what does that mean? It means they're exposed to different currencies from all over the world, right? So they've got their L dollars, but maybe they're trading with the USA, so they're dealing with their dollars. They're trading with the UK, they're dealing with Great British pounds. That does what? That exposes them to exchange risk, currency risk, okay? So there's another F1 topic for you. That's part the Foreign Exchange International Reporting Standard is part of F1. So again, we've got an overseas company. It might be relevant here, it might not be. So they expanded overseas in 2007, about 10 years ago, and they grew dramatically from then to 2012. So for 5 years after their expansion overseas, they grew dramatically is the word used. So a dramatic grow over 5 years, with revenues reaching $219 million and a pre-tax profit of $46.8 million. So let's stop there and let's understand the information that we've just been given. So they grew dramatically. They had really successful 5 years after their expansion overseas. That's really good. They obviously did it well. Something was working well for them, and particularly looking at those dates, right? So 2007 to 2012, that's kind of the early, or just before, during the financial crash, the economic global economic crisis, the credit crunch, whatever it is you want to call it. That's right in the heart of that. And if they manage to grow dramatically in that 5-year period as a luxury leather goods manufacturer and retailer, the first thing to go when the world is experiencing turbulent economic times are the luxuries like leather handbags that cost $5,000. They managed to do well in that time. That's excellent. So they were doing something well there. And let's look at the numbers, right? So revenues reaching 219 million, pre-tax profits of 46.8 million. So that gives us a profit margin of 21.4%, so over 20%. That's really good to retain that level. I mean, this is pre-tax, but this is kind of the last level of profit before tax. To retain almost a fifth of your revenues after all your costs, that's pretty good. And at that time as well, this is excellent. But, however, and there's always a however, this excellent 5-year period they had, all was going well. They had excellent margins. However, between 2012 and 2015, so again, this is kind of post credit crunch. This is a few years after it. The company suffered falling sales. Oh dear, falling sales revenue and profits. So for some reason, they had a really good 5-year period up to 2012, and whether maybe that was a bit of luck, and they expanded overseas at the right time, and that overseas expansion, maybe that diversified their risk, and perhaps that's why they did well, because they didn't have, they weren't just in one country, and so the effects of the global crash were mitigated, and perhaps after a bit of time that kind of caught up with them. And so between this 3-year period, between 2012 and 2015, falling sales and falling profits to the extent that so in 2012, the company introduced their brand to the high-end luxury market. So 2012 was the start of this falling sales revenue. This is the same year they introduced their brand to the high-end luxury market with an accompanying increase in selling prices, and that failed dramatically. Okay, so this was the cause here. They made a big mistake. So, and this relates to what we were talking about earlier with luxury. So there's different levels of luxury, and high-end luxury, evidently, I mean, for the layman like me, I don't know the first thing about women's handbags and purses. I wouldn't know, a very good if something was worth the cost or not. And so to me, it's hard to tell the difference. But obviously, there's an implication here that the high-end luxury market is significantly harder to pitch your products in and do well in than just the abnormal luxury market. Okay, so that's useful to know. And obviously the high-end luxury market, there must be you can imagine it being quite cliquey, difficult to break into, full of well-established big names, perhaps like Prada and Gucci, those kind of things. And also obviously the increase in selling prices is going to see sales revenues falling, because obviously people aren't buying your stuff as much because it's too expensive. And in fact, if you've increased prices and you're still dropping sales revenue, then it really is the case that no one's buying your stuff, not that it's too cheap or anything. So what's the issue here? Well, they tried to enter a different market and they increased their selling prices. Now, it's hard to say whether that specifically means they left the normal luxury market or whether they increased the price of everything they did. They didn't just introduce some new lines for the high-end luxury market. They just kept everything that they had and increased the price and tried to go to a new market, and that failed dramatically. That sounds more like what happened, and if that's the case, then that didn't work very well and it failed dramatically. So after a good period of 5 years, it ended quite poorly. So in 2015, a new creative director, Joseph Corelli, was appointed. Oh, that's a good point. It might be modeled on Italy based on some of these surnames. just a quick aside, it's probably more likely the UK. Joseph Corelli was appointed. At this time, the company committed to selling handbags at lower price points, between $650 and $1,600, if you can call that a lower price point. But okay, so these lower price points, and that's a huge variance right there, actually. So between $650 and $1,600, that tells you, there must be some large variance in the quality of the products that they're producing. So this new guy comes in. He's a new creative director in 2015, and he gets the company to sell handbags at lower price points. So, the obviously identifying the issue that was increasing the selling prices that made sales drop off. This guy comes in and says, let's reduce the price points again to between $650. We can still have some higher cost ones. So there's $1,600. That's probably a higher one, but let's have some lower ones too. These changes, along with the introduction of new product ranges, so often another issue here then might have been the fact that there was a lack of innovation, a lack of new products. So new product ranges resulted in improved financial performance in the last couple of years. Okay, and the reported sales revenue in 2017 was 218.5 million. That's almost back to the 2012 level, which was the kind of the start of their kind of golden age, if you might call it. So almost the same again, but the pre-tax profit was much, much lower at just under 10 million. And if we work out the margin here, that's a margin last year of just 4.5%, which is much, much lower than the over 20% we were seeing a few years ago. And that means essentially that the costs have just skyrocketed in the company. They're either they're just very, very high due to the nature of the goods. Perhaps they want the best quality leather, and that's expensive. Perhaps the manufacturing costs have increased, the cost of staff, or other costs. Maybe, there's lots of different things it could be. We don't know yet without looking at the financial statements, but that is a massive decrease in the margin, and that is slightly worrying to see that over time, that such a huge proportion of revenue is being lost to costs. And remember, they're a listed company as well, so this is going to be worrying for shareholders, and it may be, some of them may be thinking about selling their shares, or it's impacting the share price, which is going down. So there's a lot of issues with that fairly low margin there. All right, so that's the company background. Just 3 paragraphs, but I feel like I know the company pretty well now. I don't know about you, but that's it's always those first few paragraphs where you get a good sense already of what the company, some of their biggest issues they face, and where they might go, where they might improve going forwards. So we'll move on now to the customers. So Mansako's customers expect high quality products and excellent customer service. So let's highlight high quality products. That's obviously important. And these are the 2 main bits of this sentence. So high quality products, what does that mean for a company like this? We know they're a luxury provider, and they're making leather goods primarily for women. So handbags, purses, that kind of thing. High quality means or implies that the production process is the output of that needs to be high quality, and integral to that is likely to be highly trained staff, or if not highly trained, then certainly well respected staff. That's going to be an important part of the success of this company. No, it's not necessarily the case that there are highly trained staff that making handbags. That's something that presumably could be taught to someone with little experience, and that over a period of time with the right training program. But once they are trained up, it's useful to keep them on board. But if there is an element of artisanal work in there, where you have got like the design element, for example, we know that the designers are there. The designers will have had to go to school learning how to design. It's important to keep those kind of staff on board, but that comes at a price. So having that high-skilled, highly trained staff, that means an expense, a cost for the company. And so this is going to be an area of high cost for the company, keeping those good, well-trained staff. And that, of course, all relates to production. So the production of high quality products, that's good. That's about staff and your production capability and the quality of your operations. And then we have excellent service, which is more to do with the retail side of things and perhaps even includes a little bit of marketing and the post-sale service. So, keeping in touch with customers, keeping the dialogue open for feedback and those kinds of things. So that's a completely separate side of the company, but it's what the customers expect. So they want really good products and they want really good customer service. So if this is what their customers expect, then this needs to be two areas that the company are keeping a keen eye on. So making sure the quality of the products doesn't slip and making sure that excellent customer service is always there. They're going to be two key critical success factors for the company. Okay, so let's continue. So they admit to conspicuous consumption. So what that means is conspicuous consumption means these customers are buying things for the image or for the status that comes with that possession, as it says in the rest of that paragraph. They're buying it because of the luxury and the name and the brand. They admit to that, and so there's no shame in that kind of that kind of consumption here. And that's something the company could potentially exploit. They know the customers are willing to pay more for a brand name. And so that's something that they could use, for example, in their marketing, in their advertising, in their customer service. They build it into their whole approach, and they know that they're not, alienating customers by doing that. Okay, so they admit to conspicuous consumption, buying luxury products for the status. Let's highlight that because although we've already discussed it, it's going to be an important element from the customer's perspective. They're looking at status. So people who go out and buy, these nice expensive cars and that are symbols of status and expensive clothing and those kind of things. It's a whole lifestyle and approach that's associated with being affluent and wealthy and influential. So that's what people are buying into. Again, that feeds back into the kind of marketing to the right audience. Status, though, is now less about what I have, so the things I own. It's not about that as much as it is about who I am. So most customers avoid buying luxury products that do not have ecological sustainability. Ecological sustainability, for those of you, because that's quite it's a technical term, some of you might not be sure exactly what that is, or you might have forgotten. It means using natural resources wisely in the short term. Okay, so what does that mean for this company? Well, they use leather. Leather is a natural resource. It comes from animals. It's animal hide, animal skin that's turned into products for human beings. So how does that relate to ecological sustainability? Well, you don't want to use up all the products. If we suddenly cows go extinct, which are a major source of leather, then there's no more leather products. So you have to keep an eye on long-term sustainability with regards to where you get your natural resources, your raw materials from. And that perhaps does link into a little bit the animal rights kind of ethical issue of using animals for human products. Obviously, still widely done, not a major issue, but the tide is perhaps turning slowly and leaning towards more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and considerations of animal welfare go into people's purchases. On this sentence before as well, status is now less about what I have, so perhaps the amount of money I have and what I spend it on. Look at all these fancy cars and this Rolex watch and it's £5,000 suit or whatever it is. It's not about the things I own, it's about who I am. So maybe I have got a bit of money, but I'm choosing to spend it on these particular things. I want sustainable, rather than buying, a sports car that is, 5 miles to the gallon and is a huge pollutant and very unsustainable. You'll spend money on a Tesla electric car which uses renewable energy, and that's more about who you are rather than about what I have. That tries to, hopefully that brings that distinction to light for you a little bit. Okay, is there anything else we can say about that? I suppose perhaps that remember that Mansako's customers, or at least their end consumer, is primarily women, but of course men are still going to be buying those products for women, so that does impact something like the marketing approach, because you want your products to appeal to women ultimately, but you also want men or other people who are perhaps buying it as a gift to still appreciate that high quality and to go instantly to that brand because they know that's what their wife or mum or daughter likes. Okay, so let's move on to the final paragraph of this page then. So Mansako's customers are aspirational consumers. Again, that's linking into sort of the marketing approach and tells us about the customers that the company have. They're aspirational, so perhaps they're the kind of people who are on the up. They perhaps, this isn't necessarily the case, but perhaps as a youngster, as a child, they didn't have much, and now they've worked hard, they've got a well-paying job, and now they want to show that they've progressed and they've moved up in society and they're aspirational now, so they want to start buying these kind of things, and they're seeking to trade up from the mid-priced goods range but are still unable to afford or do not want. So that's an important distinction. So you've got these consumers, they want to, they're aspirational, they're looking to trade up to show that they're interested in showing the world who they are, and they want to trade up from mid-priced goods range to a higher price tags or higher luxury things. But in some cases, they still can't afford it. They're not in the top 1% or 0.1% yet. Or there's a question of they do not want. So there is this question over, the very top end, super expensive things like your expensive sports cars and fashion and jewelry and, your diamond encrusted Rolex watches, all that kind of stuff. There's a sense into which, even if you are can afford it or are affluent, you don't necessarily want that level of indulgence and luxury because it's almost show-offy. So it seems like they're trying to characterize the core customer group of this company as the kind of newly or a younger, more economic or ecologically aware, concerned group of consumers who do have the money and they are seeking to be aspirational, but they're doing it in a completely different way to perhaps their parents and their grandparents did in the past. It's not about showing what you have and showing your wealth. It's about choosing the right goods that reflect who you really are. Okay, and so this new kind of consumer, as it says, they're unable to afford, so perhaps they are still young, or do not want to pay significantly higher price tags in the high-end luxury market. So the high-end luxury, again, we talked about this earlier, is the very top end of luxury, and those where you get your silly, ridiculous prices, like the top-end sports cars and the Rolex watches and all that kind of stuff. But there is room within the luxury market. There is sort of this differentiation between high-end or mid-end luxury or just, entry-level luxury. Okay, so let's continue. Millennials and Generation Z. So if you've been living under a rock, you may not have come across these terms, but increasingly Millennials and Generation Z, these are buzzwords for new trends in consumers, and they basically describe the younger generation who are now coming of age and are having a strong impact on the economies around the world. So to give you loose definitions, millennials are people who were born from the sort of mid 80s through to the late 90s. And Generation Z, they're even younger. They were born in sort of the mid 90s up to the mid to late 2000s or noughties. So the age range we're looking at is kind of teens through to people in their 30s, mid-30s, towards 50, towards 40 in some cases, but that kind of younger demographic. And primarily we're looking at people who are in their sort of 20s at the moment. That's the kind of the if you think of a normal distribution curve, the millennial group, most of the millennials now are sort of anywhere between 20 and 30. And these demographics present the strongest demand for this affordable luxury price category. So this is a kind of the new idea of, the affordable but luxury. So high quality, but, affordable to the extent that an average or normal person can afford to buy these luxury items. And the things that these groups want are value for money, simultaneously seeking a higher quality of life. So that seems perhaps a bit of a contradiction, particularly to older generations who may have grown up thinking that, well, you get what you pay for. If you want quality, you've got to pay for it and you've got to save for it. But you have to remember, this new consumers, this new generation have grown up in a world where things can be got almost instantly, with some of these people now in their sort of reaching 20 age of maturity, and they're entering the workforce and they have money. They've grown up in an internet world where you could get videos and books or whatever on demand. People deliver you can order things on Amazon, and you have eBay and all that kind of stuff. So to them, it's normal to expect stuff instantly. And they haven't had to go through that period of having to save up for a long period of time. There's more expendable income than there has been in the last 100 years. So they want that value for money. They don't want to be paying too much. They want things to be affordable, but they also want it to be good quality as well. And the industry, the manufacturers have to appeal to that, and some of them are, and those are the ones that are doing well. Okay, so this new generation of consumers have this kind of approach or ethic that luxury is no longer just for the wealthy. That kind of underpins this idea. So as a result, a significant proportion of Mansako customers are well informed. So that's another feature of these new generations. You have access to the internet, and they have ethical concerns about the environment and the treatment of workers, and people are concerned about the negative aspects of capitalism and globalization and the impact of that on local communities. We've got all this information at our fingertips, and this generation have grown up in a world where the old system has been heavily criticized, and they're aware of that, and so they're entering the markets and the markets for the first time, and they have all these opinions, and this is shaping their spending habits. So they're well informed, and they're proficient in the use of technology. So obviously, as I just said, these kids, adults, most of them now, people from the age of sort of their teens into their 30s, they've grown up very close to technology and the internet. They know how to use it and how to make the most of that, comparing different companies to get the cheapest price, for example. It's given the consumer a lot of power, and so that makes them, they're technologically savvy. It's going to impact the way they buy things, but the point they're making here is they're just as likely to make purchases using Mansako's app on their phones as in a store. So that's a kind of comment on technological changes and the fact that any company competing today, particularly for the attention of millennials and Generation Z, they need to have adequate, sufficient technological aspect to the company. You need to have an app, you need to have a website, because that's how people are making purchases these days. Okay, and that also brings up the idea of, or relates to the marketing approach. So obviously, a lot of these people, they're using technology. They're likely to have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and all those kind of things. And that's how a lot of companies are reaching this consumer base now through these social media apps. And so companies need to seriously consider digital marketing and social media marketing, which of course is a part of the E1 syllabus. And so that might be something that we consider in preparation for the exam. Okay, so that tells us quite a bit about the kind of customer Mansako are aiming at. They're a fairly young, affluent group of millennials and Generation Z. They're informed about they're well informed. They can use technology, and so they're in a position of power in that sense. And so companies have to be very careful to make sure that they're providing to this company, because with the internet you can go to one company, and if that's too expensive, you just go to another company who do pretty much the same thing for cheaper. And that also brings in the importance of the brand and making sure that the reason these affluent customers who don't want to pay too much, they can go elsewhere. the reason that they're buying your product over anyone else's is because of your brand, because it's a status symbol, because it's better than the competition. And so the value of that brand, that intangible asset, is going to be really, really important for the success of a company like this. Rightio, so we will move on, and just in the final bit of this video, we'll just take a look at page 4, which is a chart given in the pre-scene that kind of maps out where Mansako stand in relation to some other fashion sort of companies in the overall market. Okay, so here we have an extract from a corporate marketing document, and it shows you the position of Mansako within the overall market. And this graph is based on sort of got these two axes and the high price point here. So at the top, you've got the very expensive high-end luxury brands, and then you've got low price point here. So the budget sort of affordable sort of brands, and then sort of gradient along this line. So somewhere in the middle would be kind of mid-range brands. And then the other axis is aspirational. The aspirational axis, so people who are low aspirational, they're not really that bothered about the products they buy. They're perhaps buying things for functional necessity, or they're just on the fact that it does its job. And the people over here, the high aspiration, they're perhaps more concerned about the status of the products they buy, and they're trying to tell the world who they are through the things that they purchase. And they've got a few examples of things on here. So starting at the bottom, you have department store, designer, and own brands. So these are perhaps your high street chain stores where, a lot of the clothes are, produced on a mass scale. And the shops exist all over the country, and own brands as well. So you're probably looking at shops kind of like, if you think of supermarkets in the United Kingdom, they tend to have their own clothing lines like Tesco and Asda. They have George and whatever the other one is, I don't know. Those sort of own brands, department store, Top Shop, Top Man, those kind of shops, Primark, the kind of cheap, fast fashion kind of stuff for anyone. It's affordable. Anyone can go in and get it. Okay, and so for companies down here, there's going to be a completely different approach to marketing. In fact, the marketing is more about the affordability of the clothes, perhaps the functionality, the durability of them, or just appealing to them based on this is the latest fashion, the latest streetwear, and it changes every season, so there's always new stuff. And then we move up a little bit towards the higher price points and the higher aspiration. And we've got kind of lower down of these three American designer brands. So that's going to be the US sort of designers, Tommy Hilfiger, those kind of things. Hugo Boss. Now, actually saying that, Tommy Hilfiger, not actually sure if that is American. It just sounds American to me, but it might not be. Perhaps Ralph Lauren. They're not the the most expensive, super expensive, but if you go into one of their shops in the city centre or something like that, you look at a t-shirt, just a plain white t-shirt, and it's like 80 quid or something like that. Kind of up there, kind of prices a normal person probably wouldn't pay for those kind of clothes. And then at the very top, we have French and Italian luxury brands, and the kind of things we're looking for there are the most the instantly recognizable fashion houses from Europe. So your Gucci, your Prada, your Armani, your Versace, those kind of top end, instantly recognizable famous fashion houses. Many of those brands been around for a long time, some of them up 100 years or more, and so they're the well-established, immediately recognizable ones. And then somewhere in between too, so the American designer brands who haven't quite been around long enough or haven't quite established themselves in the same way that the European brands have, you've got Mansako. So they're kind of the mid-level of this, luxury. So they're not the most expensive. There are cheaper options out there. So the American ones, similar in terms of high aspiration as American designer brands. So Mansako need to be very careful these would be the main competition that will be undercutting them. Your Hugo Boss, your Ralph Lauren, those kind of things. And then obviously they're not quite, Mansako are not quite as expensive, but they're also not quite associated with quite the high level of luxury as the French and Italian luxury brands. And to give you a real world example, looking around the internet, Mansako do seem to be very closely modeled on UK leather goods manufacturer and retailer called Mulberry. I would highly recommend going and checking out the company Mulberry, and also it will be as part of our pre-scene OCS case study analysis. We do an industry analysis, and we'll be looking very closely in that document and in that video at the British company Mulberry, who seem to be the inspiration for Mansako, the fictional company in this case. They even have sort of the same sort of size, the same number of employees. They've got sort of the same date of establishment, those kinds of things. So there's going to be quite a few similarities there. Okay, so the main point, what's the point of showing us this graph? Well, it gives us an idea of where Mansako are placed relative to other brands that we might have heard of. But the more important thing to get from this, I think, is looking at who the key competition is. And as we've said, we've got to be very careful of these American designer brands who seem to be slightly cheaper and, yes, only very slightly lower aspirational. So the question is, why would you go to Mansako instead of one of these? And in fact, if you were going to go for the higher price point and the higher aspiration, you'd skip Mansako altogether and go straight to the French and Italian luxury brands. So we've got to really sort of get our heads around this here and figure out what exactly Mansako can do to make sure that they aren't just skipped, so people aren't going for American brands or French and Italian luxury brands. How can Mansako differentiate themselves and make people? Do they need to change their location in this and maybe move to a higher price point and try to compete with the French and Italian luxury brands? That's what they tried to do before, and it didn't seem to work out. So maybe they need to consider a lower price point, but maintain that slightly higher aspiration. So they are taking, market share away from the American designer brands. And once they've grown in that way, maybe they can start increasing their price point again. Difficult question. That's quite high level stuff. That's like strategic discussion, that kind of thing. You won't be sort of asked to do much on in the OCS exam, but having those kind of things in mind when you are doing your exam are going to help you form your answers. So just before we finish, I'd like to take you through some of the products we offer in the entire case study course. So this is just one element of the whole course, and I'll just go through the other things that we offer here. So to start with, we have a study text that is devoted to the operational case study, and that's split into two parts. The first part is a guide to how to pass the case study exam. It's full of exam tips, exam strategy, time management, preparation and planning, how to write to the marking criteria, all those kinds of things. And then part two of that study text is a condensed version of all the relevant material of the kind of things that come up in the exam over and over. So essentially it's the most popular topics that have come up in past exams from E1, P1 and F1. And so those are the two study texts available for the operational case study course. And we also do course videos that are roughly based around that first study text. So the exam advice and the timing, the planning, all the things that go in to preparing an exam strategy. We have an entire series of videos that go through that in detail. So if you're more of a visual learner rather than a reader, you can check those out, and they'll be a great help in getting you past the exams. The pre-scene analysis is the series of 6 videos where we look through the actual pre-scene in minute detail, going through every paragraph, making notes and looking how we can use this information to better prepare for the exam when the exam comes up. Separate from that is an industry analysis, and that is a document and a video as well. So the two are in tandem, and the document is about 100 pages looking at the industry in which the company exists. So for example, if the case company is in the car and they're a car manufacturer, then the industry analysis would be an analysis of the car industry. And that's like I say, that's a large document where we break it down. And we're essentially, the point of that is we're doing the research for you to save you time and energy. And the really great thing about the industry analysis is that we include 25 industry examples at the end. So things that happened in the real industry. So the example I just used, it being the car industry. If we were doing the car industry, we'd take 25 examples from the car industry of relevant news and things that have happened to companies and to the industry and consumers or whatever it is. As when we get from those 25 examples, we write a little exam paragraph, the kind of thing that you can literally rehearse and put it in your exam if it's relevant. Examiners do like to see that you have a wider industry knowledge, and so putting in a little example like that can get you good marks. We do mock exams. For the operational case study, we write 3 mock exams, and we have a free mini mock that you can do that are based on the actual CIMA style case study. So they're computer based, they're online, and they're timed, and it's as close to the real thing as we can possibly make it. And that's a really good way to prepare you for the exam. Each time we write our questions based on the pre-scene that's just been released. And with those mock exams, you can get marking and feedback, and that's really essential for you to, if you do your mock exams, I would recommend also getting marking and feedback, because you can then see where you went wrong or what you did well. And the feedback allows you to improve on that. Really important part that a lot of students skip over, and they really struggle in the exam because they weren't prepared, they hadn't done the mock exams. We have masterclasses that run over a course of 2 separate weekends, running up to the exam, and they're a live, essentially a live online class webinar where our tutor will go through with you the kind of a revision one where we're recapping on the most important topics from the E1, P1, and F1 syllabus, and one will be sort of more exam focused. And then finally, we offer pass guarantee, which means that if you meet all the requirements, so you use all these different products that are available, and you fill in a checklist to say that you've done those, but you still don't pass your exam, you're unfortunate or whatever, then we will allow you to resit our course, to take our course again at no extra charge. That's really great for people who are perhaps taking it for the first time and they don't quite pass, but they need to take the course again. If you've gone through that scheme and you've done everything that we ask you to do, then we'll give you the course again for free. Okay, and that's that. Just gives you an overview of the course that we have available. Okay, and so I think we'll end video 1 there. We've gone through quite a lot, and it's probably time to break and sort of go over and have a think about what we've looked at and try to draw the key points out of that. So I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. This is a really interesting company. I mean, in the past, there's been some real tough companies to get through in the OCS exam. This one is looking to be really interesting, really good. There's some good stuff we've already found already. So this is going to be a good analysis series. So like I say, I hope you enjoyed it too, and I look forward to seeing you in the remainder of the video series.